In the know.
Good evening, everyone.
In the know.
Tony Reeves, fire. Following the news in any way, shape, or form. No shortage of things to talk about. What does it mean? What will it bring? This is a reality we simply have to accept. Tony Reeves, fire. Tony Reeves. Let's go ahead and get started.
Hey everyone, hey. Welcome to another edition of In the Know. I am your host, Tony Reeves. Let's get cracking. Today I want to talk about the little girl who kept the bus from moving forward. In other words, when people decide that someone else is causing them grief. I'm pretty sure I've shared this story with you before, but I wanted to take the opportunity to share it with you again because it just still, to this day, leaves a lasting impact. A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with my mom about what it was like growing up in the Jim Crow South. And one of the things that I wanted to know was, did you have a lot of active conversations about what discrimination and living in that environment as a person of color did you have a lot of those conversations relating to how to deal with that? And it's funny because I've spoken to both my mom as well as some of my aunts and uncles, and all of them have pretty much had the same story where two things kind of resonated. One, they lived in an environment where their families went out of their way to create safe spaces for them. So part of that safe space for them was teaching them where to move and how to move. And so this way they could be in places where they would not be put in harm's way. That was the one aspect. But the other aspect of it was that because of that, they didn't actively talk about what it meant growing up in that area, which I found fascinating. But I thought about it many years later about it does kind of make sense. If you're creating a safe space, you don't want to disturb that safe space by highlighting anything that is traumatic or drama-filled in the area that might impact the children. And so my mom, early in her life, her adolescent years, was nobody really talked to her about what it meant to be like that. Now keep in mind, for those of you who may not be aware, my mother grew up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Pine Bluff, Arkansas, the state itself, Arkansas, is about 76% white. But Pine Bluff has a very unique distinction of being about 76% black. It literally is the only, I think it's the largest city that has a majority population. So in that sense, it was probably fairly easy to create a safe space for your kids to move around where they're not really interacting with things that necessarily will put them in harm's way. In other words, a lot of the things that you know about during that time period was not something that she readily would have been exposed to, even though it was there. For those of you who don't know, my mother was born in 46, so you figure in her adolescent years, that's basically 46 to, we'll shape up to about age 12. So we say 46 to 58. And you're talking 46 to 58, she's being raised in Arkansas. And for those of you who are not good with geography or haven't looked this up on Google Maps or anything, Arkansas is considered a part of the South, or more importantly, the Confederate South. So for those of you, I've had this conversation whenever I talk to people and they're like, is it the Midwest? I say, no. If you look at the Confederacy, Arkansas is one of the westernmost states. Only other state that's more western is Texas. And we were all part of the Confederacy. And I give that as a field of reference because a lot of times when we speak about Jim Crow, we instantly go to the South. So with that, let's talk about what am I talking about when I share the story of the little girl who kept the bus from moving. Well, back in those days, of course, we've heard the countless stories of the separate but quote-unquote equal facilities that they had for persons of color. So it was, blacks would go through one door, whites would go through one door. Blacks would eat at one table, whites would eat at another table. But in most instances, the idea was you had entrances that usually were in the front for white people, entrances that are in the back for black people. For mass transit, and I'm pretty sure you know this already, particularly buses, blacks would sit in the back, Whites would sit in the front. Now, that's just the norm. And so you can imagine that most people who experience that, if you're black, you got to go sit in the back. And more importantly, you knew that without anybody telling you because there was plenty of signage to tell you that. What they didn't tell you is what would happen if you didn't do that. Most of us are familiar with Rosa Parks and her famous refusing to get up from her seat, and her being arrested for failing to give up her seat and so forth. But we don't hear about those stories enough. A lot about what are the consequences when someone of color sits in a seating area or an area on mass transit or a bus that's designated for white people only. Well, my mother did that. And she did it when she was 8 years old. And for those of you who are sitting here thinking to yourself, man, your mom was revolutionary, man. She was really about that thing. It really wasn't a revolutionary thing. My mother was 8 years old. She played piano for the church, the church I grew up in. She was running late. And I believe this was her first time riding a bus. Unfortunately, and to this day, I don't know, how it came to be that she took the bus. I believe this was her first time riding the bus by herself. And so the bus comes and she runs on the bus and she sits down. She gets on the bus, pays her fare, and she sits down. Something interesting happened. The bus did not move. And you're thinking, why did the bus not move? That makes no sense. What, it ran out of gas? No. Flat tire? No. Bus trouble, engine trouble? No. The bus didn't move. The bus driver just did not put the bus into gear, did not drive off. So my mother is sitting here, 8 years old, very, very, very confused as to why she's sitting on his bus. She's like anxious because she needs to get to church for rehearsal so she can play. The bus is not moving. Then she came to realize, and we never really clarify how she came to realize, but she came to realize the reason why the bus wasn't moving is because she had made the mistake of sitting in the wrong seat. Because when she jumped on the bus, she sat down up front. Again, not trying to be revolutionary, not trying to buck the system. She was a person late, and instinctively the first thing she did was she jumped in the first seat she saw, and it was in the front, in the whites only area. And after several minutes of sitting there and realizing that the bus would not move until she moved, I think she basically was so embarrassed by what happened, she jumped off the bus, left the bus took off because the problem had been corrected. Why? The little black girl who was sitting in the whites only seat was no longer sitting there. And my mom broke down and started crying. Years later, as I thought about that, it was a powerful lesson to me because think about how powerful this is. Now, there are going to be those people who will say, well, the law of the land at the time was it was illegal for her to be sitting there. Therefore, it would have been illegal for the bus driver to drive with a black person sitting in a whites only seat. But the reality is that, okay, here's the thing that's fascinating. How would they have known this? How would we've gotten to this point? The reality is that there was a law in place that literally said that if a black person sat in these seats, there was going to be a penalty for that. But think about how crazy that is. If a white person would have sat in the back, nothing would have happened. Black person sitting where they're supposed to be in the back, nothing happened. It's only when a black person sits in an area that is designated for a person of color, that's where it's a problem. So now you have to ask yourself this question. Why is that so relevant? Why is that important? Why is that significant? Why am I making the comment about when people decide that someone is causing them grief? If you stop and you think about it in the grander scheme of things, most of these Jim Crow laws weren't designed effectively to, promote anything for purposes of greater good. It was because a specific set of people had made the decision that a specific group of individuals' bodies caused them grief. It causes me grief to have to sit by you. Therefore, I don't want you to sit by me. You will sit in the back. It causes me grief to sit by you. So I don't want you even to sit in the front. So I need you not to be anywhere in excess to me. If you look at almost any of these things, it gives me grief for me to give you the same food that I eat, even though we eat the same foods. It gives me grief for all of these things. My mother told me about how when she used to go to the movie theaters, they had to take the movie, they had to go through the side entrance and walk upstairs to watch the movies in the balcony. Think about it. You're both watching the same movie screen, but someone has made the decision that your body being in my presence causes me grief. I can't enjoy this movie if your body is physically next to me. Think about some of the idiocies of how some of these things here. I'm going to go into a restaurant. You're going to serve me the exact same food as you're going to serve this person. But because your body being in close proximity to mine gives me grief, I need you to be away from me when I eat. Same thing with the water fountains. They would have whites only water fountains, blacks only water fountains. It's the same water. But you're giving me grief if I have to drink water from the same thing you have to drink water from. I say that to say it's important to remember, and this was something that when people talk to me, I often tell them, I said, I look at a lot of things through the lens of the experiences of my mom and my aunts and uncles, because they knew what it meant to go through a period of time where there were literally laws on the books designed not for the purpose of doing anything that benefits society as a whole. It was designed because individuals had a problem with a certain group of people's bodies being in their presence for a variety of different things. Think about it. The great Supreme Court decision, I think it was Loving v. U.S., the whole notion of banning interracial relationships. Think about how idiotic that is, where someone is literally saying the law of the land is you cannot marry someone who is not of your same race. Why? Because effectively, that person's body causes me grief. It causes me grief to know that you're going to be in a relationship that may between someone who we do not believe their body should be in our presence. So basically, you're saying, wait a minute, I have a problem with your relationship, and I need to pass a law so that I can feel good about you not being in that relationship? So I say that. And I've said this to people before. I said, when people talk to me about different things, especially stuff like this, I'm always like, are you looking at it through the lens of how it's causing you grief? And then if it is it actually causing you grief? Because if it's not, you need to ask yourself, is it really causing you the grief that you think that it's causing you? Or are you just trying to impose your will onto individuals because this is something that you want, that makes you feel good, and that you don't particularly care about that individual? I look at things through the lens of that 8-year-old little girl who literally found herself on this huge bus that would not move until she got up out of a seat that she didn't even realize that she wasn't supposed to be in. And so with that, I got a greater understanding in the grand scheme of things of understanding that a lot of times when we are looking to do things to impose laws or impose restrictions on individuals on their bodies and how they do things, are we really doing it for the benefit of the masses? Or are we doing this for the benefit of a specific subset of people who want to dictate the fact that they don't want to be inconvenienced or experience any grief from that person's presence being in a particular space? All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. As always, this is In the Know with Tony Reeves. I am Tony Reeves, and I want to thank you very much for tuning in. As always, you can hit me up on anthonyreeves.com. And more importantly, if I have to end this with my favorite question of the day, are you ready for the Anthony Reeves experience?